The storm was one of epic proportions. It closed the schools for 3 weeks, right up until Christmas break. 4 days before Christmas, that was when I met her. "Better not stay out too late or Soap Sally will get ya." Mom called this after me, right as I went out the door to go play with Rob and Terrell. I rolled my eyes, slipping on my mittens as I grabbed my sled from behind the door. "Sure, Mom, I'll be sure to watch out for Soap Sally." That was always what my mom told me. Her little attempt to scare me when I was a kid, I think. When I was younger, 4 or 5 maybe, Mom would use it to make sure I was inside before the streetlights came on. I remember the first time she ever said it to me, the moment ingrained in my brain forever. I was heading out to play in the sandbox in the front yard, something Dad had spent all day building on his day off, and she had offhandedly told me to make sure I was in before the streetlights came on, or Soap Sally would take me away. I had stopped, little pail and shovel in my hand, and asked her who Soap Sally was. My mother just shrugged and said it was something her mother had always said, and the two of us had used it as our kind of personal joke from then on. "Better get the groceries in before dark," Mom would say. "Soap Sally might get you." "Better hurry up and take the trash out," Mom would say. "I think I hear Soap Sally prowling around." We'd done it for so long, it was just kind of normal. But I wasn't a baby anymore. I was 12, and I knew Soap Sally was just a boogeyman that adults used to scare kids. She was no more real than the Wampus Cat, another of my mother's colorful stories, and I put it out of my mind as I ran to join the others. Terrell had told us that his brother had told him about a big hill near Basker's Pond. "It's so steep that when you come down it, you almost fly," he said. So I trudged through the fresh powder, over the streets that no longer looked like streets at all, and made my way towards the edge of town. My hometown isn't very big, one of those 2 stoplights and a gas station kind of places you always drive through on your way somewhere else. There were maybe 20 kids my age in town, and our whole school could have probably fit in your graduating class. We knew we were living in a podunk town in the Georgia hills, and most of us dreamed about getting out after high school and doing anything but staying here. For some of us, that dream was actually realized. For others, the cemetery was all we had to look forward to. I met Terrell near Basker's Field, a small little picnic area that butted up against Basker's Pond. The pond wasn't huge, but it was a great place to swim and fish in the summertime, and just, kind of enjoy yourself. Today, however, it was a winter wonderland of fresh snow and chilling wind. Terrell was bundled up to the eyebrows in a thick ski jacket, and his snow pants had little rolls in them that made him look a little like the Michelin Man. He too was clutching a battered old sled, and when he spoke, I could see the air puffing from his mouth, even under his hood. "About time. Where's Rob?" That was when we heard a loud yell from up the road, and Rob came running with a banana yellow disc under his arm. He was wearing a matching ski suit and a pair of thick snow boots that seemed to be the only thing he wore that wasn't yellow. His voice cut through the sound of the wind like a foghorn, and I wondered if we were the only people in town not inside right now. It was a little spooky, even in the middle of the day. "Took you long enough," Terrell said. "Are you ready to sled?" "If this hill is half as cool as you say it is, T, then I'm ready to sled till midnight," Rob said excitedly. With that, we set off. We had all seen the hill in question. Overlook Crest was the place to spread your blanket on the 4th of July to watch the fireworks, or to picnic on, or to just sit and watch the boats as they went out there fishing during the warm months. It offered a great view of the water, and as we trudged up it, the hill felt twice as steep as usual. The snow made it slippery, and the 3 of us were laughing and pushing as we reached the top. Terrell won, of course. Terrell was a beefy kid, and he was harder to push down than Rob, who was mostly skin and bones. He set his sled against the snow, and when he slid down, he really did seem to fly. We spent the day on the hill, sledding, snowball fighting, making snowmen, and generally enjoying the day. Blizzards like these were rare, and we'd been having a lot of days like this where we were just free to be kids and enjoy our childhood. Sometimes we linked up with others from school to have snowball fights or play games, but mostly it was just Terrell and Rob, and me of course, enjoying the childhood we had before it was over. We had all expected it to end when we went to high school, the dying place of childish things, and not one of us could have guessed that it might be something childish that ended our innocence. I didn't notice it was getting dark until the streetlights came on and sent a dazzle of diamonds up from the snow. Ah, crap. Mom's gonna be mad if I'm late. "Oh, relax," Rob said. "It's not like we have school tomorrow. As long as you're home before bedtime, why would she care?" Rob's parents were never home. leaving him in the care of his aunts or his grandmother since they worked late. Terrell and I, however, had mothers and fathers who would expect us home when the streetlights came on, and I could see Terrell shuffling nervously too. We were all poised at the top of the hill, preparing to race to the bottom, and when Rob saw our looks, he rolled his eyes and jumped. "Last one to the bottom is a baby," he sing-songed. We all jumped then, putting on a burst of speed as we tried to catch him. As we came down, I began to hear a strange noise, the rumble of something rolling down the street, the jingle of an almost merry bell, and the hum of a gravelly voice. I looked around, trying to find the source of the noise, and that's when I saw her walk under a streetlight. It was an old woman, pushing a wheelbarrow or a small cart. We were heading right for her, and Rob was turned around backwards so he could laugh and mug at us. "Rob, look out!" He turned just in time to smack face first into the cart. We swerved to a stop, Terrell and I running down the hill the rest of the way. We could already see the old lady bending over him to inspect the prone boy, and under the glare of the streetlights, he looked pretty bad. There was a big gash on his forehead, the blood leaving red streaks down his yellow ski suit. Rob was groaning when we approached, and the woman looked up at us, smiling feebly as she rose to her full height. She was as wide as she was tall, and she was nearly 6 feet. She wore a voluminous black dress, her hair caught in a scarf or a kerchief that trapped it against her head. Her hands were liver-spotted, her fingers long and spidery as they sank back into her sleeves. The cart she was pushing seemed to be empty, and I figured she was on her way to pick something up when we bumped into her. There was a bell attached to it, and Rob flopped back against it, making it tinkle merrily. "Dear me, I didn't see you there, son. Are you okay?" she said in her thin, spidery voice. We helped Rob to his feet, but he was shaky and hardly able to stand. I was worried that maybe he had a concussion, maybe even a broken skull, and I wanted to help him get to the house as quickly as I could. Terrell asked the woman if we could borrow her cart, but she said she needed it later and couldn't loan it out. "But I'll help you get back to my cottage so you can call for help. I'll make you something warm to drink while you call your parents and let them know what happened. Put him in the cart now. You can help me push him back to my house." I was hesitant. Mom was always clear on not taking rides from strangers, and certainly not going to their house. But Rob groaned and wobbled then, which made up my mind. Our town was so small after all. We may have never seen this lady before, but there was very little chance that she would want to hurt us, right? No one ever wanted to hurt us, and despite all the lessons about stranger danger, we had never even heard of anyone getting kidnapped. We loaded Rob into the wagon, the bell jingling as he slid in, and pushed it back the way we had come. As it turned out, the woman lived in the woods behind Basker's Park. The tires rumbled over the wood chips that led to her house, and Rob groaned as we jostled him in the cart. We had left our sleds behind, and we moved unburdened towards the dark little cabin at the end of the long road. It looked spooky at night, not a candle or a light inside. "You can push him right in the front door," she gravelled out. As we neared, something screamed at me not to go inside that house, though. Common sense seemed to have reasserted itself, and when I paused on the steps to the front porch, the old woman and Terrell barely noticed. As the door came open, I could smell something like wax melting, a warm, aromatic smell of tallow. There were floral smells as well, and something akin to the cooking of bacon fat. There was another smell, though, something that prickled the hairs on the back of my neck, a coppery smell, a wet smell. And when I took a step back, the old woman seemed to notice that I hadn't come inside. She turned in the doorway, and we made eye contact for a few seconds before she asked why I wasn't coming in. I just remembered that I thought of something, anything, and landed on a flimsy lie. "My dad, he's coming to pick us up, and if he gets there and we're gone, he'll be worried. I probably need to..." I turned to go back down the cedar path, but suddenly her hand was around my wrist. I felt my breath catch as I looked down at those long, spidery fingers. The bones creaked beneath her skin, and the flesh around them was so thin that I imagined I could see them through the pale wrapper. As firm as her grip was, her skin was waxy and slick. It reminded me of nothing so much as candle wax, heated tallow, and when I looked into her face, I could see nothing human there. Her face looked like an exceptionally well-crafted mask, a mask made of human skin. "Come inside," she whispered, and I could see that her mask bore too much makeup. She had really caked it on, and it made her look almost clownish. Whoever had applied it roughly. Her eyes were like black pits beneath all that dark eyeshadow. I whispered, my tongue now dry as it battered against my chapped lips. I just need to tell my dad Your father can't help you now, she breathed, grinning with her mouth full of gravestone teeth. Don't worry, you'll see him very soon. She yanked my arm then, and I saw my one chance to escape. I pulled back hard, nearly toppling her from the porch, my arms slipping out of her greasy grip. I was running flat out as she cawed angrily behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached my house. My mom was waiting for me on the porch, looking angry as I came running up. She asked what I thought I was doing out so late. She asked if I meant to meet Soap Sally, as she always joked about. She asked me if I intended to freeze to death out in the snow. All those questions went unanswered. All her anger disappeared as I wrapped my arms around her and told her that some old lady had taken Terrell and Rob. She called the police, but seemed angry when she hung up. She told me that they must have thought she was someone pulling a prank. They told her that they would get right on that, and the next time Soap Sally came after her to make sure there was less than a foot of snow on the ground. She sent me to bed, but my dreams were full of the old woman and her deep, pitiless eyes. In my dreams, she got me. In my dreams, she cackled as she peeled my skin. I woke up the next day to hear Mom on the phone with Terrell's mom. He came home in a state last night. Said some lady had Terrell, just like I told you last night. Didn't you find anything? I'll ask him once he gets up. If he comes home, let me know, please. She hung up the phone and came to talk to me. The police came by later that day to question me. I guess they were taking the disappearance of 2 children a little more seriously now. I told them exactly what I had told my mom. Rob had hit his head, and the old lady had offered to help us. We put him in the cart and pushed him to her house. I got spooked and tried to run, but she grabbed me. I got free and ran to the house. I told my mom what had happened, and she called the police, but they didn't believe her. It seemed like they were interested in this house now and asked me to take them there. I gave them directions, but I refused to go anywhere near that place. They came back later and told me that the house appeared to have been abandoned for years and asked me if I was sure. I told them I was, and they said all they had found was a bit of dried blood and a black dress that might fit a horse. They didn't believe me, that much was apparent, but they believed me after the soap arrived. I woke up one morning about a week after Rob and Terrell disappeared and walked downstairs to the smell of breakfast. Mom was making flapjacks and bacon, and the smell turned my stomach a little as the familiar odors assaulted my nose. To this day, the smell of hot fat makes me want to puke, and the smell of it always takes me back to that house and that day. Sweetie, could you bring the milk in off the front porch? I looked outside. Snow's 3 feet deep, Mom. I doubt the milkman ran today. Well, I heard someone on the porch a few minutes ago. They left something and didn't knock. See if it's the milk before it freezes, please. Sitting on the mat was a small wicker basket. Sitting on a bed of black cloth were square packages wrapped in wax paper. I felt my breath hitch as I saw the cloth, but tried to shake it off. What didn't remind me of the old woman in the woods these days? I reached down to pick up the package and felt the semi-solid brick of soap as it smushed a little between my fingers. I unwrapped it, not sure who would leave soap on the doorstep, and that's when I saw the note. It was under the soap, written in a long, spidery hand, and the words sent a shudder through me that the winter chill couldn't top. See you soon. I felt the soap slip from my numb fingers. When it hit the boards, I looked down and saw something that pushed a scream up my throat. It was a bone. A finger bone. The police told my dad that it was Rob's finger bone, but they found trace evidence of Terrell's bones in the other bar of soap. Both their parents had received similar baskets of soap, and, unfortunately, Rob's grandmother had brought it out of the bathroom when the police came to check. She had been washing her hands with it all day, having no clue that she was washing her hands with her grandson's body. My own grandmother came to visit a few days later. She and Mom had a long talk about something, and I got the feeling that Mom didn't want her to tell me something. As she shuffled to my room, I couldn't help but shudder as I imagined my door opening to reveal a huge woman in a black dress and a shawl, leering at me as she smiled with her witch's grin. When Grandma knocked, I told her to come in. She sat down on the bed and seemed to think about what she meant to say. "I grew up in this town too, you know that. One night my friend Grace and I were late coming home from a church dance. We cut through the park, and as we passed by the sign that said, 'Welcome to Basker's Park,' we saw an old woman who was trying to fix her cart. She asked us to help her get the cart to her house, and we obliged. No sooner had I seen her house, though, than I got a tickling feeling. My mother had told me about Soap Sally, too, and I suddenly realized what the smell was around that cart. It was tallow and lye and blood. I ran as quick as I could, and I never saw my friend again. You got real lucky, kiddo, but don't press your luck by being careless," she said, giving me a little hug as her bones creaked in that way that Soap Sally's had. She left me then, and we never spoke about it again. That was 5 years ago. 5 long winters ago. The snow is back and the days are short, but I haven't left my house after dark, not since that night I lost my best friends. Though I never saw her again, I know she has seen me. Sometimes I hear the grumble of that cart, the tinkle of the bell, and it sends me running home as surely as it did the night I escaped her. My greatest fear is that she will make good on her threat one day. One day, Soap Sally may leave me on my parents' front porch. I don't know what I'm going to do. They won't stop pounding on the door. They won't stop calling my name. And before long, someone with keys is going to come along and unlock my office. I don't know what to do. Completely out of my element here. And all my brain can come back to is that coffee. The coffee. The goddamn coffee. "First cup of the morning?" he'd asked, and all I could do was smile at him. He must be new. Because if he'd been here longer than a week, he'd know how often I show up to this machine. I stood before the coffee pot like a worshiper at the altar, and as the savory black liquid spilled into the pot, I felt my mouth water at the thought of coffee. First cup. Yeah, right. I started my day with the taste of warm, fresh brewed coffee. As I'd cooked my breakfast, I'd had another, savoring this one a little, as I never did the first cup. And as I sat down to catch up on my emails, I drank a third as I ate my breakfast. I'd had another one on the way to work, savoring the aroma as I sat in traffic, and now it was time to get a cup before I sat down for another day of work. First cup. Try fifth. I've been like this since my late teens. My mother was a career nurse who drank coffee by the pot, not the cup. As a single mother trying to keep up with an active son, there was never a time I can't remember when coffee was a part of our lives. When I was just a tyke, my mom was always running late, due to my inability to get moving in the morning. No one wants to lose their job because their kid can't get ready on time, so one morning, she gave me a sippy cup of coffee, sweetened with milk and sugar. No surprise, I took to it like a fish to water. The other parents looked at her funny when she told them. She heard the usual sermons about how coffee would stunt my growth and make me hyper, but she always felt she knew better. The fact that I was never prone to hyperactivity and grew to top out about 6 feet seemed to have proven their worries were groundless. Coffee is life for me. It runs through my veins. And I always joke that when I die, I'm going to donate my body to Starbucks. I can be their flavor of the month. That cup looks a little rough, don't you think? I turned to see Chuck wander into the break room then, unrecognizable health smoothie in his "My Body is a Temple" shaker cup. The new guy greeted him as he came in, and I extended my hand for a fist bump. As he met my knuckles with his, I couldn't help but shudder a little at how scaly and clammy his skin always is. You'd think with all that rabbit food he ate that those healthy shakes would make his skin a little softer, or at least clear up his skin condition. "It's got character, Chuck, unlike whatever you're drinking there." Chuck laughed. "If character is what you call mushrooms growing in the bottom of that thing." He was right. Not about the mushrooms, but about the state of my cup. I'd had this cup for 3 years, and in that time I had never once bothered to wash it. The outside was a little stained up, but otherwise looked pretty normal. The inside, however, was a dark cauldron of old coffee stains and filth. It didn't look that bad to me, but, of course, I had gotten used to it by now. I always justified it by telling myself that I was putting boiling water into it, so anything living in there was likely to get boiled out of existence by the time I got around to drinking the coffee. I had no idea what I was setting myself up for. The hot liquid splashed into the cup with a luxuriant sound. I swirled the contents around in the cup before taking a test sip and gasping in pain. It was much too hot, but I had known that already. I talked with Chuck a few more minutes, and when Mr. Ryan strode into the break room, we all said our goodbyes and left for our desks. Mr. Ryan's was a fantastic boss, but he had a very narrow opinion on dawdling and socializing on company time. I said hi to a few other people in my hall and stopped at Rob's door to pass a few words. He was hard at it already, and I could see his tongue sticking out through his teeth, a nervous habit he said he'd had since elementary school. His dark hair looked sweaty, and when I asked him if he was okay, he said he had to make an 8 o'clock deadline, but maybe he could catch up at lunch. I said that sounded great, and as I walked to my office, I saw that Lisa was already behind her computer as well. Lisa was a mousy new girl that had moved into the office across from mine a few months ago. She was about my age, with straight brown hair that she always piled neatly on her head, and she had a cute pair of black glasses that were constantly needing to be pushed up the bridge of her nose. She didn't say much, but we waved at each other most mornings, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't have just a little bit of a crush on her. She waved back, smiling in her shy way, and went back to work as I stepped into my office and closed the door. I sat the coffee on my desk and turned on my computer as I prepared to start another day. I'm an IT specialist, so my job is mostly fixing other people's problems. There was an email already from Janice about how her monitor wouldn't come on, and another from Steven about how his issues with the network had gotten out of hand again. I sipped my coffee as I read these, testing the hot liquid with my lips before committing to the sip. I reached for the phone so I could call Janice. Janice was a frequent caller. The IT guy before me had thought it was funny to give her the most ancient of our relic computers. I'd been keeping that dinosaur running for years now, and every time the budget committee told me they didn't have enough money for a new computer, I died a little inside. I called Steven, and after a few questions it became apparent that his problem was of his own making again. He'd opened another questionable email, and now his computer wouldn't link to the network. That was by design. Steven was notorious for opening anything that found its way into his inbox. He'd brought the network down several times with this sort of behavior, and I logged in remotely to revert it to a previous state, which solved the problem. The virus hadn't been that aggressive, it seemed, and he thanked me for helping him. I reached for my cup and found that it was empty. I'd been sipping the coffee while I was on the phone with Steven, and I'd drank more than expected, I guess. I called Janice and asked her what was going on with her computer, and after a few sentences I reached into the drawer and found a new power cord. The computer seemed to burn through them for some reason, and I'd recently made a note to keep them in stock. I locked my computer, grabbed my coffee cup, and figured I'd stop for a fresh cup on the way to Janice's office. I stepped out into the hallway, turned left, and stopped dead in my tracks. My cup shattered on the carpeted floor, and that drew the creature's attention at the end of the hallway. It was hideous. It had a bulbous gray head that was covered in coarse black hair, and the small white eyes that dotted its head were awful looking. Its jaw lolled open to reveal a mouthful of sewing needle teeth and a flicking red tongue that constantly moved over them. It was dressed in a white button-up shirt and a pair of black slacks, but the shirt bulged with coarse black hair, and the pants looked to be barely containing its oddly shaped legs. It looked at me, and for a second, eyes blinked in an odd succession before it raised a hand to ask if I was okay. I shuddered and felt my knees unhinge as I slid to the wall. It sounded like Rob. Rob's voice was coming out of this creature's mouth, and as it did, I could feel my mind slipping a little. What the hell was going on? Had I been drugged? Were they playing a trick on me? As the Rob creature made its way up the hall, I saw another thing stick its head out of the break room. It looked like an enormous bat head stuck in a business suit, and in one clawed, scaly hand it held something that looked like Chuck's smoothie shaker. He didn't even look real. The creature looked like a photorealistic movie monster, or images from a horror site when someone has drawn creatures that just look a little too real. As the rob creature got closer, I could see small sores on its skin, long curly hairs sprouting in places between its eyes, and I felt a scream ripping its way up my throat. The Chuck creature blinked his two big eyes at me. "What's wrong? You okay?" It came blundering out of the break room and towards me, and I felt my legs finally take orders as I backpedaled towards the exit door. It was 30 feet away, down several hallways, but I felt like I was motivated enough to run a mile in a minute flat. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong, and until I knew what was going on, I wasn't sure I could trust any of my senses. I had come to my office door when my back met resistance, and I realized I had bumped into someone. I turned my head woodenly to see what new horror I had blundered into, and I felt a fresh scream rip through me. It was a spider, a giant spider, but with a body on top of its abdomen like some fantasy creature from a video game. Its torso was vaguely feminine, breasts poking from beneath a blue cardigan that hung over its shoulders. Its 8 chitinous legs clicked on the floor as it took a step backwards to assess me. It looked at me with familiarity, and I could see that it had shiny black hair piled on its head above its 8 rotating eyes. 2 eyes seemed to be covered by thin metal glasses, and I blundered towards my door as I realized who it was. The spider thing was Lisa. "Sorry, are you okay? I didn't mean to." I didn't let her finish. I pushed my way into my office and slammed the door behind me. I locked the handle, pushed my chair under it, and cringed against the farthest wall I could get to. What in the hell was going on? Had that been real? What was I seeing out there? That couldn't be my colleagues, could it? They had sounded like them, even sort of acted like them, but the creatures out there had been so nightmarish that I couldn't even process it. All I could do was huddle under my desk, knees pulled up to my chest, and try not to cry as someone knocked on the door. "You okay in there?" It was Chuck. "You scared Lisa half to death, man. I think she's crying in her office right now. Maybe you could come apologize?" I stiffened. Lisa was crying. Had I done that? I couldn't bear the thought that I had made Lisa cry. I had half risen from under my desk when I'd finally gotten hold of myself again. This wasn't real. The monsters were trying to trick me so they could get me out of my office. I sat back down under my desk and squeezed my knees against my chest again. They wouldn't trick me like that. I wasn't going to be fooled so easily. Chuck banged on the door, harder this time, and asked what my problem was. Rob's voice made an appearance as well, and he apologized for startling me. They were worried about me and wanted me to come out so they could sort through this. They were scared for me and wanted to see me. They got angry at how I was acting and started banging louder all the while. I just huddled under my desk, sobbed quietly. I couldn't process what was going on, or why this was happening, and all the avenues seemed to come back to the coffee. Someone had drugged me. Someone was messing with me. Someone had done this to make me freak out. But why? That was when the phone rang. It jangled merrily in the cradle, unaware of the horror show that was just outside the door. I looked up over the edge of my desk like a cartoon mouse peeking out of his hole. I almost expected the phone to grow fangs or sprout eyes, but it didn't. It just continued to be an average black plastic phone. I reached out shakily for it, and as my sweaty hands settled around it, I felt it solidify and had second thoughts about my perception. My desk was still here. My computer still hummed peacefully. If this was a world for monsters, then how could all these things exist? How would a monster type with big clawed hands? How would he sit in a normal chair? How would he pick up the phone? As I picked up the phone, I heard Mr. Ryan's calm voice wash over me. It took me a minute to realize that he was calling my name as I was just sitting there in the calm warmth of my realization. "Hello, sir?" I said, and my voice shook a little. "Are you okay?" His voice was calm and rich, and made me feel like control had been restored. I I don't know, sir. I'm seeing some weird stuff. Have you imbibed any substances today? It's okay if you have. I just want to know how we can help you. I just had a cup of coffee in the break room and coffee at home. I was fine when I got here, sir, and now I don't know what's going on. I'll be there in a few minutes. Just wait. And he hung up before I could tell him about the monsters. I hung up the phone and sat huddled under my desk. He wouldn't be able to get here, not with the monsters out there, and even if he could, would would he be normal? Maybe this was just another trick by the monsters. I sat under my desk, shuddering and waiting for the creatures to break down my door and get me. They had stopped banging and shouting, but I could still hear them scuttling around out there. They were waiting, just waiting for me to drop my guard. Then they'd have me. 4 loud knocks made me jump and hit my head on the desk. It's Mr. Rhines. Open the door, please, so we can talk about this. I slunk from under my desk, looking for all the world like a scared rabbit as I approached the door like I thought it might explode. Are the monsters gone? He didn't answer right away, probably hoping he had misheard me. Monsters? I put my mouth close to the door jamb and whispered, The monsters are out in the hall. No monsters. Why don't you let me in so we can talk about all this and get everything straightened out? Your friends and co-workers are worried about you and are anxious to get this sorted out. My hand shook as I set it on the doorknob. I must have been wrong. Maybe I'd just had a psychotic incident or something. Now everything was back to normal. I had acted like an ass, scared the hell out of everyone. It was time to go face the music, maybe find out what all this was about, and as I wrapped my hand around the knob, I was sure that everything would be back to normal when I opened the door. As the door came open, the worst horror of all was waiting for me. He was a demon. His skin was the color of burnt pork, and was awash with cracks and blisters that opened and oozed as he stood before me. His hands were cruel claws sprouting from the cuffs of his Armani suit, and his wings extended like a miasma behind him. His face was a wide, lolling mouth, eyeless and earless, with a massive set of ram's horns that curled above the door jamb as he hulked in it. When he opened his mouth, I heard the voice of Satan himself, the lilting voice that invited Eve to eat an apple, and I knew that I would never be able to deny him if he spoke. Now, let's see what all this is. I slammed the door in his face, and they've been banging at it for nearly 30 minutes. So here I sit, writing my experience, in the hopes that someone will take something from this before they burst through the door and get me. As I write, though, a sobering feeling has occurred to me. There's a mirror in my desk. As I write this, I can't help but look at the drawer and fight the urge to pull it out. As I sit here panicked, afraid that I have somehow found myself in a world of monsters, I never stop to think that maybe the problem is me. Maybe I've lived inside a delusion my whole life. Something in that odd cup of coffee triggered me to see the world for what it really is. Could it be possible that if I were to take that mirror out and look at myself, I could see my own scales and fangs and slime as well? Could it be that somehow the veil has been pulled away and I'm finally seeing the world for what it really is? I guess the lesson here is this. Maybe a little soap and water is cheaper than the loss of your own sanity. Maybe I should have listened when they told me to clean my damn cup. I looked at the sign over the register and scoffed loudly. It hung above the bowl of fortune cookies like a silent guardian, and it had never made any sense to me. Customers are cautioned to take 1 fortune cookie. Taking more than 1 cookie may be hazardous to the customer's health and sanity. Management. I'd been coming to Yinshi Guzo for the last 10 years, and that sign had always sort of made me roll my eyes. The food this place made was well worth the 5-minute walk from my house, and I had never gotten sick here as I had at other Chinese restaurants. The food was great, the price was fair, and the customer service was second to none. Yinshiguzo was a place I came to when I was depressed. It was the place I came to when I was celebrating, or when I just needed some comfort food at the end of a long day. It was my all-time favorite restaurant, and I couldn't think of anywhere I'd rather eat. I had actually met my wife here 5 years ago, in fact. Her date stood her up, and I was coming in for some takeout. We both sat in the waiting area, her hoping for a table, since the place was bustling, and me just waiting for my takeout, and struck up a conversation. By the time my food came, she had asked me to stay and eat with her, and I agreed. A year later, we were married, and we've been together ever since, and coming back to Yinshiguzo as well. I was here again on a Friday night, date night for me and Lisa, waiting for our usual. Sesame chicken with pork fried rice for her, General Tso with white rice for me, and an egg roll each. It was crowded. Yinshiguzo was always crowded. As I stood before the counter, the sign irked me as I saw it again, probably because the cookies here were my all-time favorite part of the meal. The owner is a world-class pastry chef, as well as a great cook. He makes the cakes for the shop, and his fried cheesecake is to die for. I think his fortune cookies, though, are the best I've ever had. I know that some of you are going to tell me that fortune cookies aren't an authentic Asian delicacy, but this guy has embraced them at Yinshiguzo. He makes them from scratch, putting the fortunes in himself, and they're so buttery and delicious that I could eat them by the ton. He refuses to sell them, though, saying that they're only meant to be enjoyed one at a time, and I can't imagine how much money he loses making them like that. Wrapped delicately in their paper holders, they mocked me from the bowl as I stood looking. Leaning forward, I grabbed about 6 of them and popped them into my pocket. I couldn't tell you why I did it, not really, but it was something that I would come to regret. "Your order, sir," said the voice of Miss Kim as she came back. I jumped, looking guiltily as I smiled and thanked her for the food. As I turned to go, I heard her say something almost too low to hear. "Be careful with those. Remember the rules, sir." I turned back, but she had disappeared behind the curtain that separated the front from the back already. I shook it off. I must have misheard her, I thought to myself, as I took my food and left. I traversed the street, weaving between couples and clumps of people on their way downtown, as I made my way home. As I walked, I felt the cookies shuffling around in my pocket and decided to have one. I reached in and pulled out the hand-wrapped paper cover, looking at the little message scrawled on the outside. Good Fortune had been written on it, and I opened the wrapper and picked the fortune out as I ate the delicious cookie in a single bite. It was still soft and warm, and the cookie tasted fresh from the oven. They always seemed to taste like that, and I assumed he made them fresh every day. I looked down at the little paper and thought for a moment that it might have been handwritten, too. Did the owner handwrite his fortunes or something? That level of detail really made these all the more special. I smiled as I read the fortune. Even if it was handwritten, it was still kind of generic for a fortune cookie. Tumultuous times are right around the corner. Aren't they always, I said to myself, putting my key into the lock as I stepped inside. 10 minutes later, I had the wine chilling in the sink, the food transferred to plates, and I'd found the perfect movie on Netflix for us to cuddle up and watch together. I had it all arranged and ready for her. As I switched over to regular TV, the movie primed and ready to play, I looked at my watch and tisked. It was already 8:30. She should have been here by now. She had been working late these past few days, and I was beginning to become worried. I reached into my pocket and pulled out another of the delicious little cookies. I stopped before unwrapping this one, reading the handwritten message on the outside before I opened it. 1 per visit. Don't forget the rules. I felt my brow furrow a little. That was weird. What an odd thing to write on the wrapping of a cookie. I shrugged and pulled it out of its wrapper, pulling the fortune out as I ate the cookie. This one was good, but not as good as they usually were. It was buttery, but a little dry. It tasted like a leftover from yesterday's batch. A sports center came on. I looked at the scrap of paper inside and blew air out in a little chuckle. A loved one is thinking of you. Another classic. My phone rang about that time, and I picked it up, looking at the picture displayed on the home screen. Lisa's smiling face decorated the screen, and I smiled to myself as I picked it up. "Hey, honey, you almost here? I got everything ready for date night." Her breathing on the other end was heavy, and it took her a minute to compose herself. "Babe, I need to tell you something. I need you to not interrupt me, okay?" That made me nervous. Lisa sounded panicked, and I didn't like the thought of her driving while she was in that state. I could hear the sound of her engine in the background, and it sounded like she was driving very fast. I looked at the clock and realized it was later than I thought. Traffic could be nuts this time of night, and I wish she would pull over. Are you okay? You sound like you're... Just listen, and don't interrupt, okay? Okay, I said, hoping this would calm her down a little bit. I took out another one of the cookies as she prepared to speak and unwrapped it absent-mindedly, taking the fortune out with a deft hand. I'm pregnant, she said quickly, in a way that made me think she was expecting me to be upset. Quite the contrary. We had been trying to have a baby for years, but couldn't seem to make it stick. We thought we'd finally made it work a few months ago, but she had ended up miscarrying, and it had hit her really hard. She had really fallen into work, staying late and working on her off days, and these date nights had become our only real time to be together. The news that she was having a baby made me ecstatic. I was confused as to why she was so upset. The cookie was dry as I crunched on it. This one was definitely stale. "That's wonderful, dear," I said, through a mouthful of cookie. "I'm so happy you—" "It's not yours," she exclaimed, and the cookie turned to ash in my mouth. I felt it stick in my throat, a dry paste turning to cement, and I hacked it up and spat it on the carpet. It looked a little off as it sat in the congealing mass there, but my mind was not on the cookie. Not mine? How could that be? I've been having an affair for the last 3 months. When we lost Davin, I couldn't get over the depression. Someone at work had been flirting with me for a while, and one night oh God, babe, I don't know what to do." She was crying, and I could already hear it turning jagged and ugly. I wanted to be angry. I tried to be furious, but I couldn't in the face of her sobbing. "Come home. We'll work this out, Lisa. We can..." "Huh?" she huffed out, and I heard a loud pop of static before the line went dead. "Hello? Hello? Lisa, are you there? Hello?" But there was no one. I sat forward, bumping the table and sending the plates I had made spilling onto the ground. I heard the dry snap of the other 2 cookies as they crumbled in my pocket, but I hardly noticed. I tried calling her back, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again and again, becoming more frantic with each phone call until I finally bounced it off the carpet floor in a rage. What the hell was going on? What had happened to Lisa? I felt something papery against my palm, and when I looked up, I saw the fortune was plastered against it. I caught sight of the words, and it quelled my rage with cold fear. "Your joy will quickly become ashes in your mouth." What the hell was that? That wasn't a normal fortune. Fortunes from cookies were almost always benign, or at least neutral. Did the owner write these himself? Who the hell would put a thing like that in a cookie? I stared at it for a few minutes before retrieving my phone and trying to call her back. The screen was cracked, but that hardly seemed to matter anymore. As my phone remained silent and hers remained unreachable, I was becoming scared. What if something had happened? The fortune continued to nag at me. So far, each of them had been accurate in their own way. What the heck was going on here? This was too elaborate for a prank, and if it was, it really wasn't amusing. I had started to clean up the food I had spilled when the phone finally began to ring. I grabbed it up and prayed that it would be her face I'd see on the screen. Instead, it was a blocked number. It looked odd through the star pattern of my broken glass, and I sat it down. I could once again feel the broken cookies poking at me from my pocket. I reached in and threw both of them on the table. One of them had come unwrapped, and the fortune stuck to my finger as my hand came free. My curious mind would not allow me to ignore it, though, but now I wished I had. "You will receive 2 phone calls. Both will bring you only sorrow." I caught the still ringing phone on the 4th ring. "Hello? Lisa?" I asked hopefully. "Hello. Are you the emergency contact for Miss Lisa Callahan?" I am," I answered, unsure of what it wanted. "This is Officer Winsman. I'm afraid there's been an accident." "Is my wife okay?" I asked, still a little hopeful. The officer was silent for a few seconds. "I'm gonna need you to come down to St. Mark's and identify her remains." The phone slipped out of my hand again, and I could hear the officer saying hello from the carpet. The last cookie sat on the table, ominous in its white paper holder. The edges of the paper were black, whatever was inside having seeped into it. The covering bore a legend that made my breath hitch, and though I felt my hands reach to open it, I wanted nothing so much as to throw it out the window unread. The black letter on the front read, "Those who do not follow the rules are doomed to live with the consequences." My shaking fingers found the white paper just as the phone went silent. I've been lying on the floor of my apartment, smelling the aroma of old Chinese food for the last 3 hours. I don't know what to do. Someone came to knock on my door, but I ignored them. They said they were with the police, but I don't care. Lisa is lost to me, and I fear that may not be the end. I'm almost glad that it may not be the end. The world outside has quieted some as the night stretches on, and I continue to lay on the carpet in the fetal position, using what may be my last few hours to write this message. The black stuff that poured out of that wrapper, bits of moldy cookie floating amongst it, was nothing next to the message that oozed onto the surface. "Your end will not be so quick as hers," it said. So if you read this, and you should see that sign telling you only to take one cookie, remember that the rules are there for a reason, and those who do not obey them may be forced to live with the consequences. When Jameson March, owner of March Mortuaries, put a sign out front of his business saying that he'd be selling honey, people thought he must be joking. What kind of mortician would sell honey? Would he sell it next to the caskets in his showroom? Would he offer it graveside at cemeteries? No one knew, but there was much speculation about that little sign. Those who asked Jameson were in for quite a treat. Jameson told them that he would be selling his honey right here at the mortuary, and even gave them a sample so they might tell their friends. What they sampled was supposedly the best honey any of them had ever eaten. They went on and on about the texture and the taste and the strange exotic flavor within the honey. They said how they couldn't wait for Jameson to sell honey, and they'd be buying as much as they could on opening day. Others began to question where he was keeping his bees. They saw no beehives on his property, a 2-bedroom apartment above the mortuary. They saw no hives on the mortuary property at all, in fact. They saw no hives in the cemetery or near the crematorium. But still, the honey came. On the 3rd of March, the first jar of that miraculous concoction appeared in the front room of Jameson Mortuary. The mortuary was crowded for the next several days, and by Friday, not a jar was left to be purchased. Again, people praised the texture and the taste of his honey, as well as the myriad flavors that one would find within the jar. One of the buyers, Bert Lancaster, owned a large honey operation of his own. It is said that when he tasted Jameson's honey, he proclaimed that no bee in his field had ever produced anything so sweet. Some would tell you that he burned his beehives that very afternoon, but that's little more than town gossip. For that summer back in '86, no one could get enough of Jameson's honey. They say Helen Price used that honey to defeat her rival Linda Moore in that summer's 4th of July bake-off. They say Bert Cavell put that honey in his mead and could not make enough of it to satiate the local drunks. They say Mary Sanders was taken to the hospital over in Oakley when she ate 10 jars in a day and was reaching for an 11th when her stomach ruptured. But again, that's all town gossip. What is fact was the discovery made by Randall Smith, a local tabloid writer, in the fall of '86. Randall had a reputation for being less of a journalist and more of a mudslinger. If there was a nasty rumor started, Randall could usually be traced back to it. He'd grown pretty tired of hearing about Jameson and his amazing honey. Randall was of the opinion that if something was too good to be true, then it likely was. He thought Jameson's honey must have some sort of secret ingredient that got people addicted to it. Maybe it was even a cover for some kind of dope operation that Jameson was running out of the mortuary or the cemetery. Whatever the case, Randall could smell a story, and it would be sweeter than any nectar the old mortician could produce. So one night, as the moon hung full over Pleasant Rock Cemetery, Randall and his friends, Rooster Malloy and Charles Drainer, took a trip out to the cemetery to have a look around. Someone had reported earlier that week that they had seen some larger-than-normal bees around the cemetery grounds, and speculated that these may be the source of Jameson's honey. As it was the only lead that Randall had, it seemed as good as any. So after a couple of drinks at the Legion Hall, the three men piled into Rooster's old Chevy and headed down to do some late-night snooping. Randall still tells anyone who will listen how the graveyard was as silent as its namesake. The gate was locked, sporting a brand-new Academy security lock, one of the big, thick gold ones that graced the sheds and fences of discerning security buffs in town. So the three men had to find a different way in. This was strange, since the cemetery had never been locked before. Jameson had always let people come and go as they please. But just recently, the old man had gotten a little cagey about many things. For one, the cemetery was now locked at nightfall. For another, no one was allowed in the basement of the mortuary, not even the man who came to deliver the bodies for the families. For a third, no one but his two sons were allowed to work in the mortuary anymore, and both of them were under pain of death should they reveal the secrets of Jameson's honey. The three men had walked around the fence before they found a spot where the last windstorm had knocked down a thick old pine. It lay on the points around the top, creating a rude bridge over the wall. Now, none of them being particularly spry, they had all of them carefully shimmied up the fallen tree and then dropped down into the cemetery, careful not to get stuck on them spikes. They all felt a chill as they stood in the quiet boneyard, and Randall claimed that Rooster looked ready to brave the spikes if it meant being out of there. The wind rattled the skeletal trees on the grounds, and the little flags that had been stuck on some of the graves for Labor Day snapped mischievously and startled them more than once. They had brought flashlights, but the big old trader's moon that looked down on them was more than enough to keep them from tripping into a open grave or smashing their shins on an ill-placed tombstone. The quiet cemetery was enough to sober even the bravest of them, and it was probably why they heard the shovels before they saw the men. Crouching behind a particularly large family headstone, Randall saw two men digging into a fresh grave. They were exhuming a body by the light of that pregnant moon, and Randall knew whose it was to boot. We had been to the widow Hadley's funeral that day, and it appeared that whoever these men were, they were taking her from her freshly dug resting place. As they watched, the corpse flopped to the surface most unceremoniously, followed by March's sons, Hannibal and Gavin. Hannibal hefted the body, leaving his younger brother to fill in the hole as he took it deeper into the cemetery. Gavin went to his work, and bent as he was, he didn't notice the three men as they snuck around him and followed his older brother. Hannibal had been a football player, a linebacker for the local school team in his day, and he toted the frail old woman as easily as someone might a sack of corn. As they followed him, the three men weren't sure what they expected to find, but Randall was certain it would be something to add a macabre twinge to the story that he meant to write. They followed Hannibal as he came to a newly built mausoleum, the name across the door reading March.
He unlocked the door and unceremoniously tossed the old woman into the crypt. The men hunkered low behind a pair of gravestones, but they needn't have bothered. Hannibal was a big boy, but his night eyes left something to be desired. He no more saw them than he did the place marker that he nearly tripped over on the way back to his brother, and as he stomped off into the cemetery, the three men approached the crypt. The mortuary was a nice new one, sunk into the ground a little to protect any caskets placed down there, and it would have looked more at home in New Orleans than this Georgia backwater town. To the knowledge of anyone in town, the Marches did not have a family crypt until very recently. The only March buried there would be Jameson's wife, since his mother and father were buried up in Macon at their own family plot. Hannibal may not have been the smartest March in town, but it appeared he was smart enough to lock up behind himself. Another one of those big, thick academy locks, the kind that had been on the front gate, greeted the three men as they got to the door, and they were forced to prowl around the mausoleum to see what could be found. It was Charles who found the little vent in the mausoleum, but it was Randall who saw the horrors that lay inside. Randall and Rooster had been looking for a window, or perhaps another entrance, when Charles came hoofing it back to show them that he had found a little vent that opened into the crypt. Randall asked him to show him where it was, and the three men found the little opening, just big enough for a large child to fit inside. Charles and Rooster now were pulp wooders, and much too big to squeeze into holes. Randall, however, had made a career of squeezing into places he was not precisely wanted, opting to stick his head in to get a better look. Randall had his friends hold his legs while he shimmied into the vent. Charles and Rooster slid him in as far as they dared, and they said his flashlight could be seen through the slats at the top of the mausoleum. When Randall started screaming and yelling for them to pull him out, it sounded like the devil himself had gotten hold of him. When they pulled him out, they said he was white as a sheet and said to tell the sheriff immediately. Whether the brothers had gone when they made their escape or not, they missed them entirely as they beat a retreat back to town. Now the sheriff took some convincing to get out of bed, but when Randall told him what they had seen down the crypt, he came with 3 other men and the biggest set of bolt cutters they could find at the station. Jameson's sons were leaving when the sheriff and his boys pulled up, so they didn't end up needing the bolt cutters after all. When he laid it out to the 2 young men that they could either cooperate or sit in the same prison cell with their father, the one he was surely to occupy, they decided it might be in their best interest to show him what they was doing. When the sheriff asked the boys if they would need suits, the 2 shook their heads. Bees are mostly docile, Hannibal told them, and sure enough, when they cracked the door open, not a one came charging out. They descended into the ground, and by the light of the sheriff's flashlight, they saw the horrors below. The bees swarmed the small pile of corpses, taking whatever they used to make the honey back to their hives. The hives covered the walls of the crypt, making a sticky webwork of catacombs. The corpses down below were fresh, most of them having died very recently, and the bees were taken to them with gusto. The brothers said they came down here once or twice a week to harvest the honey, and that the vulture bees were taken to the warm Georgia summer quite nicely. When the sheriff interrogated them, both said that it had been their father's idea. He had read about vulture bees and thought they sounded like an interesting idea. Then, when their mother died, he'd done a little experiment. He'd put her down in the mortuary and procured some vulture bees of his own. The boys had been horrified when he'd showed them what he'd been up to, but Even they had to admit the honey had been the sweetest they had ever eaten. Something about the readily available nature of the local pollen, mixed with the bees' instincts to collect whatever they got from the corpses, had made for a potent and delicious treat. She was the catalyst for all this, Hannibal had said. Those first few jars he handed out to the people for tasting were honey made from our mother's body. He began to cry then, but the sheriff had all the evidence he needed to proceed. He arrested Jameson March that very night, but there seemed to be some confusion on what to charge him with. Couldn't really get him for murder because he hadn't killed anybody. Couldn't really get him for fraud because he buried them bodies just like he said he would. In the end, they got him on simple corpse desecration and a little misdemeanor fraud for not telling the families what he intended to do with them their bodies. He got less than 5 years in prison. I hear the warden let him keep the beehives in the prison garden. Seems like his talents didn't go to waste, not even behind bars. He left town when his time was served, he and his boys. The funeral home's been empty ever since. The police found the beginnings of his beekeeping operation in the basement. That, and a secondary hive with a swarm of agitated vulture bees. Jameson tried to sell the mortuary, but nobody seemed to want a place with that sort of reputation. It collapsed under a late February snow back in 2012, and they destroyed the mausoleum they found all them bodies in about a year after Jameson went to prison. And that's the sordid tale of Jameson March and his bees. I have no idea what they did with those bees after they turned them out of the March mausoleum. They likely just turned them loose into an environment that was alien to them. So, if you should be traveling through the Georgia back roads and see some larger-than-average bees or taste sweeter-than-average honey, be very suspicious about its origin.
The usual lunch special, Charles? Yeah, Damien, but no crab rangoon this time. Trying not to eat so many carbs. Whatever you say, dude, Damien said, ringing him up. To say that Charles ate a lot of Chinese food probably wouldn't put his problem in perspective. Charles had been lucky when the pandemic hit. He was a work-from-home computer tech who rarely left his house anyway, so working on projects from his apartment was pretty par for the course. He'd been getting lunch at Damien's for the better part of 8 years, and they had the best Chinese food within walking distance of his bungalow. Though COVID had put an end to him dining in, it hadn't stopped Charles from getting his fix. Quite the contrary, it had only made it worse. Charles ordered from Damien's 3 times a day. Breakfast was egg drop soup and early morning rice at 10. Lunch was General Tso chicken around 2 o'clock. Dinner was beef and broccoli with house soup and salad at 10, and was also the last delivery that Damien's made for the day. Charles honestly couldn't remember the last time he had cooked a meal for himself, and it just seemed easier to buy takeout. His programming job paid way more than he needed, especially after a lot of his coworkers had quit, and Charles was enjoying his shut-in lifestyle. When he heard the knock on his door, he rolled away from his keyboard and went to get his lunch. It was the short, dark-haired guy this time, the one who looked a little like Bruce Wayne. He didn't speak a lot of English, and Charles told him thanks as he took his food inside. Damien's only had about 3 delivery guys. The nerdy Bruce Wayne was the one who delivered most often. Charles had been hoping it would be Roger, though, the brown-haired Chad who liked to talk about Warhammer. But it appeared he'd have to wait till dinner time to see how he'd placed in last week's tournament. As a shut-in, Charles often had to live vicariously through those who braved the outside world. As Charles looked through the bag, ensuring everything was in there, he smiled as he saw his favorite part of the meal towards the bottom. It was silly, but Charles found that he really looked forward to those buttery yellow little cookies with the fortunes inside. He knew they were far from authentic cuisine, but he liked the cookies ever since he was a kid. Charles had about 100 of the fortunes pinned up on a corkboard, and sometimes he liked to read them and think about their meanings on days he'd gotten them. Had he found someone new when he got that fortune? Had he found untold fortune on that particular day? Looking at them so often was probably why he had noticed the phone number. Want more cookies? Call 1-800-555-2665. He had never really thought about it before. It was probably the number for the restaurant to resupply their fortune cookies. The fact that it appeared on the fortunes, something that were inside the cookies, was a little strange. How would the restaurant get the number if they handed out the cookies? It didn't really make sense for the people eating the cookies to need more cookies. And as Charles sat the food on his desk, he opened the cookie and fished out the fortune as he munched on the little cookie shell. Today, you will make a hasty decision that will change your life. Damn, Charles thought, that one was different. It seemed benign on the surface. Everyone made decisions that changed their life, didn't they? The message wasn't the weird part, though. It was the sinister undertones that Charles couldn't quite shake. Not just any decision, but a hasty one. He ate the other half of the cookie before adding this one to the corkboard, looking at the phone number that sat under the lucky numbers. Want more cookies? Call 1-800-555-2665. Charles grinned, turning back to his desk as he opened the rest of his food and began to eat. Who wouldn't want more cookies? Charles worked well into the night. By 11, he had fixed the problem in the code his boss had sent him. One of the other coders had been a little sloppy in the parameters, and as a result had caused the program to crash as often as it returned anything usable. Charles had fixed it, emailing his boss about 10, and had started bumming around on Reddit as he thought about what to do with the rest of his evening. He wasn't ready to turn in yet, but he wasn't really interested in any of the games he had in his Steam library. He was just kind of wasting time as he scrolled through Reddit when he came to a weird post about strange phone numbers. The poster was talking about how he had called a number he'd found and how the guitar instructor had turned out to be a real creep. They claimed he had later seen the man on America's Most Wanted, but Charles thought the last bit sounded like bullshit. The comments mostly agreed, but some of them had talked about other weird numbers they had called. Massage parlors that had turned out to be brothels, contractors that had later robbed the house they had renovated, weird number stations that called back when you hung up, everything in between. The more he read, the more Charles thought about the number on the fortune cookie. It couldn't hurt to call. Maybe it would even give him a cool story to tell to strangers on the internet. He walked over to the board, cell phone clutched in hand, as he read that old familiar legend again. Want more cookies? Call 1-800-555-2665. Charles dialed the number in that stilted way that people do when they dial a new number. He had to go back and try it again after putting the number in wrong the first time, and when it started ringing, Charles assumed that a machine would get it. They would probably just bury him in a phone tree, and he would never actually talk to a real person. Either that, or the number would ring twice and then tell him it had been disconnected. They had probably had these cookies out for a while, and the number would have changed or been liquidated altogether. The third ring had barely started when a bored-sounding woman picked up the phone. Hello? Charles blinked, and the woman had said hello once more before he finally shook it off and answered her. Yeah, I was calling about the cookies. Wonderful, we'll send them right out. Don't you need my address or my... No, sir, it's all taken care of. Thank you for your call. Then she hung up, and Charles was left staring out into space. Well, that had been weird, he thought. He figured it might be time to get ready for bed. The phone call had weirded him out, and he had another long day tomorrow. As he snugged down under his covers, he couldn't help but glance over at the fortunes on the corkboard. He wondered how long it would take them to send the cookies to his house. Would they send them all at once, or would this be a situation where they sent a few at a time? He fell asleep dreaming of the buttery little fortune cookies, and when he woke up, he decided that he must still be dreaming. His hands wrapped around the plastic film of a single fortune cookie, and as he opened it, he could smell the flaky aroma of the pastry inside. When he broke it open and felt the crumbs fall onto his chest, he opened his eyes and realized that it was no dream. The fortune cookie was tucked under his pillow, as if the tooth fairy had left him a buttery treat instead of a quarter. Charles looked at the fortune as he ate and was surprised to find not a fortune, but a thank you note. Thank you for your business. That was when he remembered the phone call from the night before. It was weird, but he couldn't see how the two could be connected. He must have just imagined eating the fortune cookie last night. Charles had no idea how it had gotten in his bed, but it was a nice surprise, nonetheless. He put in a call to Damien's, and when he sat down on the couch, the phone ringing as someone no doubt ran to grab it, he heard the crinkle of cellophane from under the couch cushions. Reaching under the cushion, Charles found another wrapped cookie, this one slightly broken from being sat on. "Hello? Charles, you ordering?" Damien's voice brought Charles back to reality, and he munched on the cookie as he placed his morning order. He was soon eating his breakfast, the cookie out of his mind, but he would think back on that day and decide that that had been the first appearance of the strange cookies. The next day, Charles found 12 individually wrapped cookies. They were all scattered around the apartment. They were tossed haphazardly around, some under the couch, some as far as the kitchenette. Charles couldn't exactly put them off as something he'd forgotten or misplaced. How had they gotten so spread across the living room? Then his eyes fell on a small takeout bag in the trash, and he felt like he knew the answer. Roger had delivered his food this morning, and he remembered telling him about the number he'd called to get more cookies. Roger had said it sounded a little spooky, and told him to let him know when the cookies arrived. Charles had gone to get his wallet so he could pay him, leaving Roger at the door. That must have been when he'd tossed the cookies into his house, probably thinking he was being funny. Charles nodded as he collected up the cookies, the explanation reassuring him until he remembered that it was almost time for dinner. Roger had delivered his food around 11, so how did Charles not notice the cookies for 8 hours? He put it out of his mind as he picked up the phone so he could order the dinner. The next day, Charles found 20 of the cookies scattered around his house again. Not all at once, of course. Charles had sat down to eat his breakfast when he found the first one under the couch. Then he stumbled across the line of 10 or 12 cookies stretched over the couch and to the far side of the kitchenette. They looked tossed haphazardly, and he gritted his teeth as he imagined Roger smirking as he covertly threw a handful of cookies into the apartment. He picked up one of the cookies, preparing to call Damien's and tell Roger how he'd gotten him good, when he remembered that Roger hadn't delivered his meal this morning. Roger wouldn't be there till noon today, and the other guy hadn't even known about the number. But if it wasn't Roger, then who else could it be? He tried to put it out of his mind, but when he found 4 more in the bathroom sink and 3 more in his bedroom, it was harder to overlook. He found more in the bathtub, but by then, any thought that it might be a joke was over. None of the delivery guys could have gotten this far into his apartment. He was more confused than scared, but Charles really wanted some answers. When he called to place his lunch order, he was surprised to find Dianne answering the phone again. Surprised, but not unhappy. "The usual?" Dianne asked, and Charles could already hear his pencil scratching. "Yeah, but I got a question." "We don't do discounts for frequent customers," Dianne joked, but he must have heard something he didn't like in Charles's voice. "No, nothing like that. I was wondering about where you get your fortune cookies from." "My uncle orders them. Why do you ask?" "Well, I've recently started finding them around my house. It was just a few yesterday, but they were all over the house today. I found 20 of them so far, and the fact that no one's been in my house since right after COVID started is a little..." But Dianne cut him off. The usual good-natured ribbing was gone. Charles believed that this was the most serious he'd ever heard Dianne. "You called the numbers on the cookies, didn't you?" Charles' mouth went dry as he heard Dianne get to the point. "Yeah, but I haven't gotten any cookies delivered. They just keep appearing in my house. I don't understand how this is happening, but I want to know how they're getting in." He was silent for a few seconds, and Charles thought he had hung up. When he spoke, Charles suddenly wished he had. "You can't stop it. There's no taking it back once the deal is made." He hung up on Charles then, and they refused to take his calls. Charles was on his own, it seemed. On the 3rd day, Charles found his couch covered in cookies, and he estimated there were about 50 in all. That was when Charles called the police. They came out and checked the house, but they couldn't find any sign of entry. Charles showed them the cookies, telling them how they had just appeared in the middle of the night, but he could tell they didn't believe him. They thought he was playing a joke, one at their expense, too, and they clearly didn't appreciate it. They told him they would look into it and to call back if it happened again, but Charles figured they would be another group that would ignore his phone calls. He tried to call Dianne again, but no one picked up. He locked all the doors before bed, ensuring every window was secured, and checked every point of entry. He had told himself the night before that if it kept happening, he would get the landlord to change the locks. How else could they be getting in? This had to be a trick. Someone had too much time and they wanted to play a trick on him. Whether they were pranksters or not, Charles wanted this to stop. Charles lay on the couch, all the cookies swept into a pile in the corner, and hoped they would just be gone when he woke up in the morning. He awoke to find the floor of his apartment covered in the little yellow cookies. They crackled angrily as he set his feet down on them, and when he stood up, they were up to his ankles. As he trudged through them, he saw they covered the floor from the living room to the bedroom. The bathroom door opened with some pushing, and as he waded through them so he could use the toilet, Charles was racked with a sudden wave of angry coughs. He felt something tickle at the back of his throat, and was certain for half a second that he was going to throw up. His urine trickled to the floor as he hit his knees, and when the thing splashed into the toilet, Charles felt something cold squirm in his guts. The cookie floated in the filthy water like a strange buoy in an alien sea. As he watched it bob there, Charles made a decision that would change the rest of his short life. He slid his shoes on and left the house for the first time in months. The bell rang as he walked into Damien's, and the staff's smiling faces curdled as they saw him. Charles sat at the table he had taken every time he had eaten here. The staff went about their jobs, actively avoiding him, but Charles wasn't going anywhere. He knew that Dianne had answers. He knew something, and he'd sit here until he got what he was after. Even if it was Dianne telling him how exquisitely screwed he was going to get some answers. Dianne let him sit there for close to an hour, before finally coming out. "I told you there was nothing I could do. You've been cursed. Don't you understand that? The least you could do is not spread it around." "You know something about this, though," Charles said, glaring at him from between his steepled fingers, "and I'm not leaving until I get some answers." Dianne turned his head away, seeming to think about it before finally telling Charles to wait. "Without you calling in an order at 10, I can finally close this place up on time. Wait till then, order whatever you want, and I'll take you to someone who has answers." Charles scoffed. "I can't just sit here all day." Dianne only shrugged. "If you want answers, then I guess you'll have to." With little choice but to wait, Charles ordered some lunch. The staff kept his drink full, and Dianne was true to his word. Charles ate when he was hungry, drank when he was thirsty, and used their facilities sparingly. He couldn't help but imagine his poor apartment as it filled up with the buttery little cookies, and the longer he sat, the more anxious he became. Where was Dianne taking him later? Who would explain the situation? Someone else who had called the number? As the sun set behind him, Charles wanted to go with him less and less, but knew that he needed to more and more. As the crowds faded and the restaurant emptied, Dianne finally came out and told him it was time to go. "We can take my car," he said, indicating a small hatchback out front. The car ride was short. They drove a few streets towards a small cluster of family homes that ended in a cul-de-sac. Charles could see several people wave at Dianne as he drove towards the house at the end of the turnabout, and the sight of that place made him a little wary. Where the others had well-maintained lawns and houses that looked well-kept, this house they stopped in front of looked old and ready to fall down. The grass was mostly sand, patchy and limp, and the front porch was covered in boxes that looked ready to be shipped. The place looked abandoned, like a hoarder's house, but Charles could see people coming and going through the front door, most of them carrying boxes like the one on the porch. Dianne killed the engine and looked at Charles. "You sure you want to know? It won't change your fate." Charles nodded, unable to damn himself with his words, and Dianne climbed out and set off towards the house. Charles followed meekly enough after, but it wasn't until he got to the porch that he realized what those boxes were. He didn't need to read the foreign characters to know what was inside. The open box contained a bunch of familiar yellow cookies that Charles had come to hate. Whoever owned this house was packaging the fortune cookies in boxes. When Dianne opened the door, a cascade of wrapped fortune cookies slithered onto the porch. "It's even worse than usual," Dianne mumbled, wading into the sea of cookies as he beckoned Charles forward. The inside was even worse. The house was full of boxes, and the pair had to wade through the hip-deep sea of fortune cookies. Charles could see others wading through them, shoving them into boxes as they took them out. Charles could see a kitchen and a den as they waded through the house, and Dianne seemed to be leading him towards the back. As they made their way down a hallway towards the back bedroom, the cookies got thicker and thicker. Dianne knocked on the door, calling out a name Charles didn't understand. "Uncle?" Dianne asked, a strange gurgling coming from inside. "Uncle, I got a guest who wants to meet you. May we come in?" There was another gurgling response, and Dianne invited Charles inside. Charles was surprised to find not a room full of cookies, but a neat and tidy bedroom. Inside was an elderly man in striped pajamas, his dark hair plastered against his skull, and his unreadable eyes floating dully in his wrinkled face. His sallow skin clung to his bones like a bleached corpse, and if he hadn't turned to acknowledge Damien, Charles would have thought he was dead. "Good to see you again, Uncle," Damien greeted him. "This is my uncle, Dallin. He once owned the restaurant that I own now, but he made a miscalculation. He was trying to cut costs, and when he saw that he could get more cookies by calling the number, he gave it a try. At first it was wonderful. Dallin had enough cookies to stock the store for months, and he was glad for the windfall. Soon, the cookies started taking over his house, though. They covered the floors, they crept up to the ceiling, they spilled into the yard, and finally, they started filling him, too." The words sent a chill through Charles, but he had to be sure of what he was hearing. "When you say they filled him, what do you—" Dallin coughed suddenly, deeply, a racking cough that shook his whole body. Charles took a step towards the sick man, but Damien put a hand out to stop him. The old man crossed his arms over his chest, trying to steady himself, and bent low over the comforter. As the coughs became thick, Charles thought the old man meant to bring something up. Then he lunged forward suddenly. Charles watched as a cascade of cellophane-wrapped cookies fell onto the bedspread. He began to tremble, just like the one he had brought up earlier that day. "So," Charles said, having to swallow a mouthful of spit, not having the moisture to speak more than a few words. "So I'll start doing that too?" Damien nodded, putting a hand on his shoulder. "I'll have some of my people come over to pick up the cookies they leave behind. We can pay you for them, hopefully making it a little easier for you. Eventually we can bring you here. You can live in comfort for however long you have left, but eventually you'll be no different than my uncle here." Charles stood for a minute, unable to come to terms with what he was seeing. He wanted to deny what Damien had said. He wanted to tell him how it just couldn't be real. But then his body was consumed with vicious coughs, as if to prove how real it was. A single cookie pattered to the floor at his feet, and Charles realized it was already too late.